besties, super late again. So Deadly Illusions, must requested, and if I'm being completely honest, a little bit pissed that I didn't cover this when it was hot and trending. You see, there are two reasons. One, I was busy doing other things. But mainly, I thought it was a series because I just kind of like hovered over this thing on Netflix and the production value and the dialogue. My brain was like, ah yes, lower budget, lower tier, Netflix series. Don't got time to cover that right now. Except it was a movie this entire time. It's one of those things that seems to kind of have like a decent thriller premise when you first look at it, but then its execution is just trash in every conceivable way. It's also a movie that leaves a lot up to ambiguity and interpretation. As I weave through this tale, I'll kind of let you know what some of the central theories are as it's going, but I 100% feel like this is supposed to be like a choose your own trope type movie. But by the end, I really do think it's just a series of ridiculous scenarios constantly trying to one-up themselves. One of which could have been really cool if they had hard committed, but with bad dialogue, horrible portrayals of mental health issues, and very weak performances. It doesn't really have a chance of standing out on its own merit, but it certainly stands out for something. But ultimately, so much of this movie just doesn't make any damn sense. Not because it's being smart, but because it's stupid. As always, if you had fun with this, that's great. There is a certain level of wacky excitement to this kind of watching experience, so like I get it. But let's hop in. If you've already watched this movie, let me know what your chosen adventure storyline is down below. So we're immediately introduced to Mary, a very successful retired thriller author who's being hit up by her publishers to write another installment for her Delirium series. And she is not stoked.
This is not what I thought we were meeting about. You misled me, Kyoki.
And what becomes immediately obvious to me is the acting. It's rough, to put it kindly. But then this new associate comes in with like the absolute disrespect, saying that it must be nice not to have to worry about her children and how she can just sit back and rake in the residuals without thinking of the people that got her there.
I am right, aren't I?
Okay, look here, you little shit. If she worked hard and she succeeded and is now just able to live off the fruits of her labor, she's allowed.
You don't know what you're talking about, and you should be fired.
Yeah, this feels like a Lifetime movie in every conceivable way so far. And I don't mean that in a good way. But then her husband sees the envelope that they left behind and just kind of like opens it. And he's like, did you see how much they offered you? $2 million up front! Which is a lot considering the reason why they're pushing her to write another installment is because the publishing house is not performing well at all, and they hope that her writing another installment will flip the tide. And even though she's happily retired, Tom's like, wifey, you gotta consider this. Because later, while they're outside casually smoking a cigar, he's like, well, I kinda made a really big financial boo-boo 6 months ago and never told you about it and lost half of our savings. So you might say you have to write the book. And it seems like it's something he's done before, so like, girl, why is he in control of the money? But in order for her to write the book, she'll likely need some help around the house with the kids, and her friend Elaine just happens to have the perfect solution. Huntsman Enterprises. You hire a nanny from the super prestigious company so you can focus, bang out this book, and get back to business as usual. But then Mary's like, I don't know, Elaine, like, you've never seen me while I've been writing a book.
I turn into a different person.
Our young women come from impeccable backgrounds. Many of them are attending prestigious schools and looking for creative ways to pay tuition.
Wouldn't a company like this have people that specialize in child care and intend to do that for a career? Like, her friend literally talking about how prestigious and fancy and selective and expensive this place was, but they're all completely average childcare people.
Love your house. It has the best lighting ever. It's great for photos. I'm kind of using this as a learning curve for myself.
And just when she's telling her husband that it's no use, she can't find anybody.
Oh, honey, wait. I think another one's arriving.
Oh my god, the line delivery! But this girl immediately starts reading while Mary is making some tea instead of, I don't know, making small talk. And this impresses her, but it's not like this was a waiting area. Like, you can see each other.
I think it would be amazing for them to see a young person reading an actual book.
Okay, hate this narrative. Young people read a ton. May I direct your attention to the massive young adult novel empire and numerous franchises that went on to be turned into movies and television shows. Yeah, we're all addicted to social media, but we read too. I'm not young. Anyways, I'll stop with my literacy campaign.
The way to be happy is to be good.
Okay. okay. But she continues to be impressed by Grace. The kids come home while she's on a call and she's just making up some story about the son's drawing. And Mary's like, wow, so good with children. Come see my personal library. Where Grace realizes that she's an author and gets so unbelievably excited, and Mary offers her a temporary job for a week while she writes the book. That is a fast turnaround time for an entire novel. And it seems like it's a good fit. She's great with the kids, great around the house. But when she goes to take the kids swimming and Mary offers her a swimsuit, Elaine's like,
only one piece you have, and it just happens to be from the cover of a Playboy swimsuit magazine.
basically implying that Mary might have to worry about Tom getting distracted by Grace. But Mary's like, what, Grace? No, she's a prude. Yeah, until you mess it all up. Now this is another one of those sensual thrillers. That means people do it. Like, they have full sight of the kids and the dad's like, when's the last time we did it in the kitchen? Like, sir, your children and the new babysitter are right there. Maybe just wait till, I don't know, she leaves and the kids are asleep. But it's the next day and Grace is the picture of perfection. She's great at cleaning up around the house, bringing Mary tea and a snack, and Mary just can't break the writer's block and decides to take Grace shopping. For bras? That has to be workplace harassment. Are you kidding me? Like, yeah, trying to help her feel confident is one thing, but why do you have to be in the changing room?
I remember when mine used to look like this.
But then Grace comes in with a suplex and pulls Mary's hand down to her breast and is like, in case you want to remember what they felt like in your youth. What is happening? Anyways, business as usual, nothing abnormal here. Life goes on. One last bit of timid weirdness when she comes into the room without knocking to just say that she's going to be late because she has a doctor's appointment the next day. I also have to wonder if this movie is funded by Big Cigar because she is once again just casually smoking one while wandering around the grounds and spying on Grace trying on her new clothes. Look, I thought Grace was going to overstep her boundaries, but it's you! Then it cuts to Mary in a meeting with her publishers after she had just zoned out and realized they essentially want her to write the main character to actually be the villain so they can explore the darker side. Foreshadowing! But she starts blanking out again to thoughts of Grace before hard cutting to her at the gym with her friend Elaine asking if she's ever been attracted to another woman before. And Mary's like, no, but one minute she's just this innocent little girl and the next she's just this supreme seductress.
I feel like she would do whatever I asked her to do. To me.
Ma'am, that is your employee. But she just passes it off as the weird way she gets when she's writing books.
Make her your muse then. You said you're having writer's block, right?
Yeah.
Get the most bang for your buck.
Maybe no. Maybe not that bang. Anyways, Mary and Tom head to a fundraiser with Elaine and her husband, and he starts talking about how he's excited that she's writing a new installment. And immediately after saying she doesn't want to talk about it at all, she brings it up.
I really don't want to write it.
But he's like, oh, but I love that series, especially book 4. And she's like, yeah, everyone loves book 4, but I was in such a dark place when I wrote it. And this man, instead of maybe asking like, oh, what kind of dark place? Or make sure you take care of your mental health first, is just like,
lean into the dark. That's where your best stuff is.
So this is where things start getting extra weird, which I know you're probably shocked because it's been so normal so far. Mary gets Grace to put sunscreen on her back, and then she gets really into it. And Mary is also really into it. And then suddenly she's in the pool and they're drinking and dancing to Joey by Concrete Blonde because she's finally been able to break the story so her writer's block is over, all thanks to Grace. Which to me kind of treads that a lot of things happening is just like Mary writing scenarios out in her head. But then this awkwardness happens.
Please don't ever let me go.
Be here for you forever, Grace. We love you.
Guys, it's been like a week. Anyways, Mary falls asleep on the couch and then wakes up to thoughts of her husband making moves on her. Then it changes to Grace, then snaps away like a dream. So I'm taking it as a dream. But later on, Mary pulls her aside and is all like, hey, like what happened earlier just can't ever happen again.
What happened? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, me neither. But Mary takes it as a, what do you mean? What happened earlier? Which might be how it was meant, but who knows? The weird train continues when she's taking a bath and Grace comes in to add milk and rose petals and feed her honey from a spoon.
Let me make you happy.
I I don't know what's happening. And then it just snaps away instantly and no one's in the room. And she may be stealthy, but I doubt Grace is teleport away in a second when her hands were up a hoo-ha stealthy. But Mary's like, well, the bath has milk and rose petals, so she must have been here? So I think Mary is either imagining things or just completely losing chunks of time. Either way, her writing is going great. She's pushing off time with family, but at least making real progress when it lingers on a page she's writing describing a murder of scissors being plunged into a neck. Foreshadowing. But while she's working, Grace and Tom go to drop the kids off at school, and Tom's like, well, I'm taking the whole day off work, let's go grab some breakfast. And while there literally isn't anything unusual about this, Elaine sees them at the school and makes weird, concerned eyes at them. But when they do get to breakfast, Grace orders a Bloody Mary, and Tom's like, wow, I've never seen this side of you. Something seems different. And oh my God, Bloody Mary? Is that foreshadowing for Mary being bloody? Probably not. Let's just keep going. But Grace ends up doing this full body stretch in the cafe and just showing off a bunch of her body and just super flirty suddenly.
What is going on?
But the way it's cutting back to Mary, it's around here that I think a lot of the things that are happening are just Mary exploring different plot ideas for her book. Like she's openly said that she gets weird while she's writing, that she goes to really dark places. It could make sense that she's just traipsing around to these weird fantasy zones of her worst nightmares of like her husband cheating. Well, she's also cheating. I don't know. Trust me, there's a lot of options and everything is stupid. So it's 3 weeks later and Mary and Grace go for a bike ride to celebrate the first draft of the novel being finished. And Mary reads her poetry as Grace starts to caress her thigh and they kiss. And so far, this is the only intimate interaction that doesn't seem ambiguous or cut away in a weird way.
I see so much of myself when I look at you.
Is it foreshadowing that they're going through the same things? I feel so weird about all of this. But then when they go to leave, her bike tire is slashed even though they're the only ones around. Now this will randomly come up later, but I still can't figure out why. It literally makes no sense that this happened at all. So they have to walk the bikes back, and when they get home, Elaine is there arguing with Tom. Then Elaine once again suggests that if her and Tom aren't being intimate since she's been writing, he's probably being intimate with someone else. And later on, we'll find out that this woman is a therapist. So that makes all these little jabs super concerning. You go to a therapist when you have thoughts like this, not to be given thoughts like this. Yeah, there's clearly some weird stuff going on, but Mary's the one getting it on the side. And when Mary tries asking specifically what she was there talking to Tom about, she's just like, we'll talk about it when we have more privacy. So she heads back in the house, and even though the family is around, Grace just keeps talking about how beautiful Mary is, but Mary's trying to mostly ignore it and talk about how it's her and Tom's anniversary tomorrow.
Please. You deserve this.
And she just gets right on under that robe. What the fuck is going on? Then the family comes in and Mary excuses herself as not feeling well. And I just kind of assumed that she was flustered from cheating on her husband, but some people think that she was drugged by Grace when she got her to try the chili. And because one of the notes for her story was drugs in the food, this is either Grace enacting Mary's story or Mary imagining out her writing. But she wakes up and hears yelling and then sees Grace and Tom having sex on the kitchen counter. But everything is all echoey, and like the last thing she hears is, don't worry, she won't remember any of this, which could mean drugs. But then she fully wakes up and they're just now having dinner. Like, how much time has passed and where were the kids if they were bumping on the kitchen counter?
Wasn't me.
And Mary's immediately standoffish with Grace.
You and my husband were fucking!
Ma'am, your children are right there.
Mommy's scaring me.
Me too, kiddo. So she's just like, sorry kids, sometimes when I write, I can't tell the differences between it and reality. Great. And considering the lack of logic on the timeline and this statement, it just really continues the idea that Mary's either imagining a lot of these things, dissociating, or just getting way too invested in her writing. She also starts adding things to memories. Like when she sees them going at it, there is no cigar in Grace's hand. And later when she goes outside to smoke one, suddenly she's thinking about Grace smoking a cigar while it was happening. But she tells Tom that it must have been a nightmare based on her feeling of betrayal, that he's the reason why she has to make herself mentally vulnerable again to fix a mistake he's made before. So they head to bed and she starts wandering around the house and everything starts feeling trippy, and she picks up the first draft of her book and then it cuts to waves crashing against rocks, and then she wakes up cozy in bed with a smile. And Mary finds out that the reason why Huntsman Enterprises never cashed her check is because she never picked a caretaker. Turns out they don't have a Grace. You'd think they would have figured that out weeks ago. She would have had to have notified somebody when she picked her day one. And people need money to survive. How could Grace be doing this for no money? It's either Mary is a bad writer and this is her book being acted out, or the film wasn't written very well. So because Grace mentioned something about libraries earlier in the movie, she decides to go see if she can get her personal information from the librarian, which she does? She doesn't even have her last name, and this woman just gives her all of the information on file for the last person who had checked out the book that Grace was reading that first day. This would never happen! But instead of, I don't know, getting Grace out of the house or going to talk to her about it, she goes to find Elaine, who is dead with a pair of scissors plunged into her neck, just like in her story. So she starts getting questioned by a detective who then asks what kind of medication she's on, and they have footage of someone that looks like her with a scarf going into the building. But why was Elaine at work at 1 a.m.? She's not even full-time anymore. But Mary's prints are also on the scissors. And obviously the officer's like, there's way too many similarities between your made-up story and reality, bucko. But Tom's like, I believe you, and Elaine's husband believes you, but where did you go last night? Because according to her, all she did was shut off the light in her office and go back to bed.
You were gone for nearly 3 hours.
Wow, just enough time for a murder. Then, for some reason, he's like, the knife that was used to slash the bike tires was found in our garage with your fingerprints on it. Okay, so, couple things. One, why would they be looking at a slashed bike tire in a murder investigation? And two, why would they be fingerprinting a knife in her garage when they have the murder weapon because it was still in the victim's neck? But the tire slashing also made no sense. Why did it happen? Then we get to the big reveal. Not only is Elaine a therapist, but she used to be Mary's therapist. That's an issue. You can't be friends with your therapist. And it looks like they had a session recently because they found a sheet with notes in Elaine's office about out-of-body experiences, time loss, PTSD, memory gaps with Mary's name on it. All things that may be indicative of some kind of dissociative disorder. And memory gaps and the time loss definitely track. We've been seeing her go through it the entire movie. But earlier in the movie, Grace said she was going to be late because she had a doctor's appointment, which she somehow have randomly had an appointment with Elaine, even though she's only part-time now and presumably very expensive. Again, nothing really makes sense, but there's all these little threads that lead you down in different directions, which would be cool if it was executed well, or as an actual choose-your-own-adventure movie, but this is just dumb. But then, for some reason, instead of Mary just being like, hey, I just found out that my nanny has been lying about who she is, she just leaves and goes on the 2-hour drive to Grace's listed address from the library, which happens to be her aunt's place. But as she's driving, Mary starts imagining Grace doing everything, wearing gloves while slashing the tires for no apparent reason, wearing gloves while taking the scissors, again, just kind of suggesting that maybe this is all Mary's writing. Then it shows the aunt talking to herself.
I don't know what she wants, something about Grace.
What the hell you let her in for?
And this is where the movie truly becomes a gross shit show. Maybe the research has changed since I was in university, but from my understanding, most conversations that someone would have with an alter they came aware of would be in their head. And this is clearly setting up to imply that Grace also has dissociative identity disorder. So the time she's all sweet and kind is most likely her, and then the time she's all sexed up and dangerous is her alter. Movies gotta stop! Especially since the consensus is that dissociative disorders are not hereditary. They're the brain's way of coping with trauma. Okay, current theory. A lot of this is Mary clearly making things up. But I think Mary did kill Elaine because she too seems to be dealing with some kind of dissociation. But Grace is also dealing with some kind of dissociative disorder. Apparently Grace's parents were arrested for being abusive to her and her siblings, and she was raised by her aunt. But then she mentions that Grace got a job at a fancy gym. So Mary puts it together in her mind that Grace would have overheard her and Elaine talking in the locker room, applies for a job with Huntsman Enterprises, and then somehow finds her address right at the top of this paperwork when this lady conveniently left the room. None of this makes sense and is 100% Mary trying to work out what might have happened. It literally shows her going through 2 different reaction options.
I am overqualified compared to those brats.
And if you need help with anything at all around the office, cleaning, whatever.
But then actively thinks about how when she's writing, she becomes a different person.
I turn into a different person.
Look, ambiguity is great, but you need to pick a lane. There's also no obvious reason why Grace would specifically want to work for Mary. Unless we're supposed to believe that this person grabbing one of Mary's books at the beginning of the movie was Grace and then stalked her around until she could be in her house? Why? But the husband's having a shower and suddenly Grace is there wearing the same coat that Mary has.
I already told you I don't want to play these games with you anymore.
So this is the only indication that the husband was doing some kind of funny business with Grace. But so was the wife, so who is anyone to judge?
One thing you should know about me, Tom, is I'm completely insane.
Stop! And then she starts slashing at his stomach with a knife before stabbing him. Then Mary gets home.
She seduced me.
Okay, come on, who wrote this? You'd think he'd be a bit more concerned about the fact that he's bleeding out. So she tries to ask who did it, and then Grace comes back in all innocent again, cleaning up.
I tried to stop her. I told her you were nice people.
And Mary's like, tried to stop who?
Me, you cunt.
Margaret.
I hate this. I hate it so much that I have to convince myself that the canon is that all this is being fabricated by Mary for her book. And Margaret's like, you have to kill her because she doesn't really love you. Because that makes sense. So she and Mary start fighting, and then Grace's hair gets stuck in a blender and it pulls out like a chunk with some scalp, and like, was that necessary? Then it does a flashback to her childhood where Margaret is like, I'm the only reason why we survived, implying that not only was she being abused by her parents, but her siblings too. And yeah, that would be a scenario that could cause dissociation, but this is just a really shit portrayal. But also, was that a real flashback or something that Mary's making up? So she starts strangling Mary, but Grace is like, no, stop, and Mary manages to knock her out with a vase. Then suddenly Grace is being cradled by Mary.
I love you, Mary. I love you too, sweet girl.
Like, props to being understanding for her mental health issues, but like, your husband is bleeding out. You'd also think there'd be a little bit more shell shock going on here, unless Mary manipulated the entire thing for her story. I don't know, it's really whatever you want. And suddenly, it's a year later. The husband's fine, and she's writing again. But this time, it's something that she's wanted to do for a long time, and she leaves a copy of it on Elaine's grave. It then shows her going to what I assume is a psychiatric facility, but there's no real security, and Grace is just in this ultra kid mode randomly.
Deal me in.
Mary!
It then shows a woman dressed as Mary leaving, but wearing the scarf around her head, just like when Elaine was killed. So, couple options here. Sinister one is that Meredith took over, killed or incapacitated Mary, and then escaped. Or Mary, who was writing again, slipped back into her altar as she was leaving, but hopefully just didn't do anything.
I turn into a different person.
Or I don't know, maybe Mary was just chilly. I know the actress who played Grace, who was Kelsey Grammer's daughter, says the treatment for the sequel's already being written, which would imply that she's in it, but that doesn't mean that Mary wouldn't also be in it. So this is an absolute mess. There are multiple possibilities, and all of them have conflicts or are stupid. There's Mary being drugged the whole time, which doesn't really seem right. There's Mary dissociating and making everything up. There's Grace is dissociating and Meredith is orchestrating everything. There's a lot.
And you were like a totally different person. You were like somebody else.
The most charitable option also happens to be the one that's the most trash for mental health representation. That somehow Mary, Grace, and the aunt are all dealing with dissociative disorders. We just don't get a glimpse into whatever might have happened in Mary's life to lead to it. And for whatever reason, it only happens when she's writing. And that it is Mary walking out at the end. She is losing time, and she is most likely the one that killed Elaine because she just didn't want her interfering with the book writing process. And all the stuff with Grace is actually happening because they're both just dissociating.
I love all the twists and turns. Couldn't figure out who the killer was until the very end.
It's just so much. But the way Tom said she seduced me. It's just too ridiculous for me to believe that this is anything other than an elaborate writing experiment for her book. However, this whole thing feels like a bad Lifetime thriller, so I guess that would track. I was gonna go through every single option that I've seen mentioned, but trying to unweave every single one seems dumb because ultimately it's whatever you want it to be. It's a movie that you could look up 30 different explanation videos and articles, and they'd all kind of have different interpretations of different things and scenes. And it's definitely intentional on the movie's part. Like, was Grace nervous in the beginning because she's timid, or was it because she knew that Huntsman Enterprises didn't actually send her? There's just too much going on in all the worst ways, but I fully understand why this was topping Netflix charts for weeks. Look, I love twists, but maybe just chill a little bit. But let me know what you guys are thinking down below. What is your canon for this story? Because like I said, there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. If you think that, Grace was drugging her the whole time, or if you don't actually think that Mary was dissociating, or all of these different things. There's a lot of different ways you can go down this. Let me know what you guys are thinking down below. So thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. I hope you all had a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.